Thanks for joining our Oracle Digital Assistant webcast series. I'm Jürgen Kress, part of the Oracle Product Management team. Today's webcast is the third in a series to create better enterprise chatbots. This webcast is live and an on-demand recording will be available. For details, please see our newsletter and subscribe to the Oracle Video Hub channel. In today's presentation, Daniel Teixeira will give us details and tips what it takes to build a better digital assistant. Good afternoon, Daniel.
Hello. Hi, Jürgen.
What are you going to present today?
Today's session is all about entities. So we're going to cover entities pretty much from end to end and explore all the capabilities within our platform.
Excellent. In case you missed part 1 and 2, recordings are available. Based on Oracle Digital Assistant, customized bots can be developed, or SaaS skills and templates, for example, for HCM or Oracle Service, can be leveraged and extended. Skills and templates are available for almost all SaaS services. Objective of today's webcast is to provide you the guidance to build better digital assistants. Our team is supported by ARTI and Oracle Digital Assistant. Please go to the Oracle documentation website and activate ARTI in the lower right corner. Quick housekeeping. Please ask your questions via the Q&A tool or contact ARTI. Share your feedback via the Zoom. Today's webcast is recorded and will be published at Oracle Video Hub. We host this series of 6 webcasts to help you to build better enterprise bots. In case you missed part 1, what makes a great digital assistant, and part 2, natural language processing, please see the follow-up email. In part 4, we will talk about conversations. In part 5, about backend integration, and the last part will focus on channels. For details, please see the registration page at bit.ly/buildbetterbots. With this short introduction, I would like to hand over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Jürgen. Welcome, everyone. Really good to have everyone on this call. Today is the third part of our webinar series. And as I mentioned just now, today's session is all about entities. I have a slightly modified agenda than the one you've seen or received on your email. But I will divide this in 3 main parts. I'll start with an introduction, setting the scene, exploring some of the challenges we commonly see around entities. Then we'll jump to the second part where we start immediately exploring entities in the ODA platform and looking to some use cases that we can use entities just beyond normal extraction of information. The third and last part, that's where we'll bring out the big guns, the composite bag, the entity event handlers, machine learning entities. So this is divided in these 3 different parts, and along the way, I'll bring out some demos, some skills to help illustrate and show examples of the things of the messages that I will try to convey on this session. So let me just start by stating the obvious. And the obvious here is that we have a natural ability to communicate. When we communicate, we don't really think about it. We don't try to analyze it. But if we want to port that ability to a machine, if we want to port that ability to a computer program, we need to be able to deconstruct what's happening in that conversation. And on that same note, I want to illustrate that with a very simple interaction that everyone is familiar with, which is a restaurant or a cafe, and there's the waiter trying to get information. That's this interaction that happens. And if we think about it, here, when the waiter prompts the client and the client provides information, the waiter, not only does he know what's the action immediately, he knows the action is the ordering of the meal, but he's also able to process all the extra bits of information, like what's the side dish, what's the main course, any extras. Is able to understand that's missing information, drinks was not provided. So this is all very natural. Furthermore, on top of this, he's also able, he knows that this is not the time to ask for coffee. This is not the time to ask for dessert. Even though that information is missing, this is not part of this context, right? So this is fairly natural interaction that we are all acquainted with. So the technology behind it, this is how all of that works, right? And what we need to do, we need to bring these innate capabilities into our conversational AI platform. And the way to do that, we have tools to help us doing that. So here, I'm not going to explain how conversational AI sits in the bigger scope of AI and machine learning. I just want to focus here on the available tools that we have within conversational AI that help us process language. In the previous webinar, Grant talked about the NLP, and NLP is the tool to help us when it comes to intent recognition, when it comes to understanding what the user wants, right? But we do have another tool, and that's called named entity recognition or extraction. And that one is aimed at helping us extract information from what the user said. And that's the main tool that we have to extract all the relevant information. And again, so let's pick up the previous example. Let's try to deconstruct that interaction, right? So the first thing that happens is, NLP kicks in, does its intent recognition, tries to identify what's the action. That's number one. Number two, it's the named entity recognition, or just trying to gather the information from that input. And you can gather the information from the main course, from the sides. We realize there's missing information from the drinks. This is, you can map this to be a sequence, okay? And if you look at this in parallel to a conversation flow or a dialogue flow, this becomes evident that the interaction between, the whole interaction to extract entity information is, in itself, it's a conversation, right? And this is something we're going to see during the webinar, is how closely together both the dialogue flow and the entity extraction are. This is something we call a model-driven conversation, and we'll touch upon this later on during this webinar. Okay, so having said that, I think it's important to, before defining any entity extraction strategy, it's good to just at least have an awareness of the most typical challenges we may face, okay? And some of these examples, we already show them in previous sessions, but they really help us illustrate some of those challenges. One, and again, there's no particular order here, but obviously ambiguity is a big challenge, right? Language is ambiguous. The way people talk, the way people communicate can be ambiguous, may not follow a anticipated format or structure. So that will bring challenges to the conversational AI side of things. So if you look to these examples, and again, if I say, I would like to arrange dinner for 6 tonight, this is really ambiguous, right? I'm really not able to tell whether it's 6 people or 6 o'clock. And neither will any machine be able to tell, at least without proper context to this, right? So this is a tricky one. It's not clear. Same thing for book vacations for June. June who? June the month, June the person. There's no way that we can, with certainty answer that. So these are clear examples of ambiguous statements. The third one, it's clear for a human, right? If someone says it was me and 2 others, we know this is a total of 3 people. But that's, is it that obvious for the machine? So this is the kind of things this level of ambiguity, it's hard to manage. So it's good to be aware that ambiguity is at every turn in conversation, and you should be able to handle it, to address it. And again, these are just some English examples, right? Every language will have its own ambiguous expressions and sentences and so on. Another challenge is when information is provided unexpectedly, right? So conversation is not linear. It doesn't go A, B, C, D. There's no linear progress to conversation. It can jump loops, can go back, can go forward. And that's, again, something natural that happens in conversation. Again, the examples here, If the chatbot asks the user for when do you want that pizza delivered, and the user answers something completely different, that is what we call out of order. And that should be handled appropriately, because part of the conversational AI challenge is to be able to accommodate a realistic interaction, right? If you don't accommodate a realistic interaction, at the end, what you're offering is just some advanced form of, filling a form. And that's really not what we are going after here. Context. Again, context is really important one. It can be particularly tricky to identify within a conversational AI. So in this particular example here, where the user says, can I pick up my meds there? Obviously, there refers to something that happened previously in the conversation. So it is important to have a hold of that context, regardless of being, in this case, location or address-based context, but can be time-based. We can have a topic-based context. So maintaining or having an understanding of context, that's also a challenge. And that's something that it's important to be aware of. The order of which the information is provided can be critical in some cases, right? So if you say, I want to change US dollars to euros, the order is everything here. If you say, I want to fly from JFK to LAX, the order is critical. You change the order, you change the meaning of the sentence. So in some particular use cases, we need to be able to understand source and target, from to, in order for the meaning to remain there. It's not just picking US dollars and euros. We need to know where to apply them. And the last one I have here on this list is how to deal with the infinity list of values. So pretty much what this means is, how can I know what I do not know, right? So this is a tricky one. I'm not able to extract a value that I'm not aware of. Spoiler alert, machine learning entities. But anyway, we're going to address that at the end. It's a very interesting use case. I'm going to cover this towards the end of the session. Now, there is much more than just extracting values, right? You are able to extract those values, but you may have additional challenges, which is if you need to do validation to the data that you just picked up, right? So, if we're talking in the context of booking a flight on a particular date, right? So you extract the date, but there's more to it, right? You need to assert that that date is in the future. You cannot book something for the past. On the opposite scenario, if you're creating an expense is something occurred in the past. So there's a wide variety of business logic, business requirements that for which we need to have the necessary tools to not only extract that information, but to go a step further and to implement all sorts of business logic, validations, requirements, and so on. Now, the good news, all of these challenges that I just showed, and many more, because this was not an extensive list, they can be addressed with out-of-the-box capabilities of the Oracle Digital Assistant platform, and others with conversation design. Now, let me give an example of this. In the previous example, when I said the dinner was me and two others, right? We can address this with conversation design. We can have the bot asking, including yourself, how many people attended the dinner, or what was the total amount of people attending the dinner. So this way, we are guiding the user to give the proper answer, which is free. So this is a simple solution, low-tech approach, and sometimes tends to be the most efficient. What I want to say is that not always you need a technical sort of solution to address conversational AI problems. And just to finalize here, we see a lot of implementations where developers tend to fall in their comfort area of using, custom components, the Node.js SDK, falling into this heavy load of creating complex solutions because they feel comfortable there. What I want to show in this session is that you should leverage all of the out-of-the-box capabilities because there's a lot of power there, and you should leverage first those capabilities, before looking elsewhere. Okay, so that was what I call the first part, just a little introduction. And again, in this webinar, I'm going through the entire journey from beginning, looking to the simplest of entities until the most complex ones, okay? So entities in ODA, we have system entities. These are built-in, part of the platform, ready to be used, little to no configuration required. I'm talking about, well, you see them here: email, person, address, datetime, currency. The names here are self-explanatory, and you can use these entities out of the box and very easily extract this kind of information. And I'm going to show this in a little bit. On top of that, you have the custom entities, and the custom entities, again, you don't need to create any code for this. You can just declaratively create them in the browser. And you can create, just going to cover some of the options here. Value list, superly widely used custom entity, where you define a list of values for which the user input must have a match, or you try to extract something based on that list of values. And then you can go further with defining synonyms and fuzzy match and so on. I'm going to show you this in a little bit. You can have also regular expressions, again, for those cases where you know the pattern, you have static pattern. Think about postal codes, passport numbers, order numbers, driver license IDs, these kind of very fixed patterns. And you can use regular expressions. Regular expressions have been around us for a long, long time. And they're really a perfect solution for these static formats. You may have dynamic entities, again, same as the value list, but they sort of have an attached framework with REST APIs that allow to update those values in real time. Machine learning and composite bags, I'm going to park these two for now because we're going to address them later on. But what I just want to show is that there's a wide variety of choices, again, from system entities and custom entities. Each one of them is specific, meaning that it can offer solutions for you to define your strategy. And that's the goal here, to have different tools to implement your different requirements, right? Each one has a different approach, a different technique behind that. And that variety of solutions is that what will allow us to design or to implement a proper extraction strategy for the needs we have, because everyone will have different needs, right? Every project, every use case is different. So having said that, okay, I just want to show some of the custom entity properties. And some of you already be familiar and acquainted with this, but I really want to convey a couple of things here. First of all is that the properties control how the entity behaves and controls the messages, okay? And we see that even though a lot of you may be aware of the properties, what we see, and we do a lot of reviews, project reviews, code review, both internally within Oracle and externally, and we see that most of the properties are not being used to the full extent of their capabilities, and that's, I want to exemplify with a couple of them here. Simple one, description is something very rarely used, but it's quite important to provide a description to actually what the goal of that entity there, not only for other people that come on a later stage, but because conversational AI projects involve potentially people from different areas. You can have a conversation designer, you can have a reviewer coming on a later stage, and having that description does help out to explain exactly the goal of this entity. Again, a very simple thing, but very rarely we see it being utilized. Of course, there's more important properties, and again, for example, error message and prompts. These two are a must-have. And when I say must-have, I'm not talking about having an hard-coded value there. I'm talking about having a proper strategy on how to utilize them. Let me give an example. We did reviews where these fields are empty, just the default values, definitely not good. But we also have seen other implementations where there's just an hard-coded value there. Slightly better, but there's better approaches to that. For example, you should have multiple prompts. Multiple prompts offer, and again, this is where it touches, connects with the conversation designer, offers different prompts, different variety of responses the chatbot will have. And all of this should be used with a resource bundle. There's no hard coding here. Should not use hard coding values here. Should use resource bundles to reference that to the place where all the messages are maintained. Same thing with the error message. Error message, you should have a resource bundle for it. You can potentially expand the message with some expressions that will feed to make it a more, let's say, a better. I'm going to show this in the demo exactly what I mean with error messages and the prompts. And again, there's a lot of things here that need to be utilized to the extent of the capabilities. Custom validation as well, where you can have, further expressions to validate, of course, all in the realm of the capabilities of the Apache FreeMarker. So I just wanted to give this, these are the common properties, and then each one of those common entities will have specific properties to address their capabilities. And better than just, talking about this, I'm going to just give you a little glimpse into it. Let me just bring my browser. Yes, I somehow expected there was a signed out. So I'm going to open a little pizza skill I have here. Just let's look at, and I need to zoom in a bit because I believe this is, there you go. So let's look first to the system entities. And as I told you, I'm going to do an entire journey end-to-end on all the entities capabilities. So we do start with having a look at some of the system entities. So if you come to the entities tab on your skill, everything that is capital Ks, these are system entities. You have the address, you have the currency, some of them you have little configuration or locale parameters, date, time, email, location number, you name it. And this is, again, out of the box. You don't need to do anything. So if I'm going to my intent, I'm going to pick up my order pizza intent, and I'm going to add them as they are out of the box. You'll see, for example, I'm going to add currency. I'm going to add person and number. You add them, you train, and they are ready to be used. Now, if I come to the test utterances and I say something like, I want a pizza, you can see that, well, there's no detected entities. But if I say, you see that number immediately extracted, currency resolved as US dollars, and as well, person name, which you may wonder, how did this identify this as a person name? It's very strange. We're going to explain this also later. This uses machine learning to power this system entity. So that means that even the system entities, each one of them may use different technology to give you those capabilities out of the box. Okay, so this is very straightforward. You can use those system entities like that. Now, if you go back to the entities, you'll see I already have some custom entities I created here. I'm not going to create one now, but I can show you a couple of value lists. So I have a value list here. Again, we have a description. The value list accepts values. And one of the particularities of value lists, and again, this is one of the most used entities, is that you define the values. That's great, but you should make use of the synonyms. And again, best practices, we've seen in a lot of implementations, synonyms are not being used. Value lists only make sense if you use values and synonyms. This is widening the match for what the user says, right? So if the user says, I want a L pizza or a big pizza, this will match with large. This will know what it is. So this is really, really critical. And here you see some of these other properties, error messages. This is all default here, prompts, and so on. So these are the properties that you bring with the custom entity. So I'm not going to explore all these properties now. Along the way, in other demos, we're going to explore a little bit more, but let me just show you what happens when we add this pizza size. I'm going to train again. and I'm going to test it. So I'm going to leave the utterance as they were. I'm going to ask now. So if I say like this, large. Large was a synonym. So this resolves as large. So this is something very helpful, really, really helpful, and should be used always with list of values. You can go one step further, for example, and I'm focusing on the list of values because it's one of the most important ones, right? So we're going to cover some of the other types along the way, but this one is really important. Value synonyms, you can do something else. If you use the fuzzy match, you can go one step further. You can go one step further in sort of widening the net that extracts that information. So if I say, let's say I have a typo and I write small, slightly different. So this was resolved as small, but without the fuzzy match, there will be no resolution on this particular value, okay? Just a little glimpse in how you can, start leveraging the out-of-the-box entities and as well the custom entities. Some best practices to sum what we've been talking up until now. Use the description field of the entities. Have some sort of naming convention. What we do in our projects, advise everyone to do. Prefix your entities with their type. So list underscore or dot, list dot something, ml dot something, regex dot something. This is really useful along the way. You may have dozens of entities in your project. This is really helpful to help everyone navigate the proper way. And probably the one that I'll keep repeating across the entire session is use define prompts, define messages, store them in resource bundles. And this is absolutely critical in being able to handle pretty much what chatbot says, right? So there'll be a copywriter or a conversation designer that will need to be able to manage all of that. And I know some of these things, some of you are already doing that, but again, this being a best practices, we want to go and at every step of the process to highlight the things that we really believe are very important. So up until now, the only thing we've seen was purely value extraction, how to take data out of the user input. So in OVA, entities are multi-purpose, right? So they allow us, obviously, to extract information, that I'll call that the main purpose, but at the same time, they help validating user input, and they also help with building value lists and building action menus. Now, again, at this point, some of you may ask or say, no, Daniel, yeah, that's what we're doing. We know all of this. And if that's the case, that's really great because it means we are using entities as they are meant to be used. But going back to a lot of the reviews we do from, again, internal and external code, what we see is that there's still a lot of solutions being implemented where the approach for, let's say, querying information from the user is to using a common response component for those ones using YAML Dialogflow or using an ask question template that asks a question to the user responds to that, and that information is stored in a variable inside the Dialogflow, and then there's logic being executed whether implemented in the Dialogflow or outside in the custom component. So this is still happening in a lot of implementations, and this is really making life hard for the implementation. This is adding complexity to the implementation. We see other cases where, for example, menus, again, built with common response components and hard-coded values in the Dialogflow, whether it's the YAML or the new Dialogflow approach. So this is really sort of the harder way to implement something. And therefore, this makes this relevant because when you use an entity-driven approach for validation, extraction, and also action menus, what you're doing, you are adding an out-of-the-box robustness that, doing a different approach with a custom component or Dialogflow, you will not have with that. And therefore, we are, again, highlighting this, even though a lot of implementations follow this approach, but not all. And therefore, we really want to highlight the importance. And we're going to show an example of this. Okay, let's split this into extraction and validation, and then the action menu. So for extraction, as we've seen, the NLP intent resolution, similarly to what we were doing in the testing the utterances, it resolves the intent, but also extracts the entities. But if that does not happen, if there's no information provided, we need to use a specific dialog component called resolve entities. I'm just going to make a side note. The next webinar session will be all about dialogue and conversation flow. We haven't discussed that up until now, but I'm just going to bring some of those dialogue components like resolve entities, which are important to understand how the entities work. So when the information is not given to the chatbot, we can use a specific component called resolve entities as part of the dialogue. And that resolve entities will be the engine that will extract or prompt the user for that information. Okay, and the good thing about this, when you use this, let's say use this with the value list entity. So value list plus resolve entity in the dialog flow, one state together. This does a lot of things for you that you don't need to worry about. It will render a menu of options for the user. Now, if you have a value list, let's think about the size, pizza size. If you add that to a resolve entity component and the user didn't provide the size of the pizza, that step will automatically render a menu of options to the user. And this is a menu that you have full control. You can decide to show all the options, 2 options, no option at all. The good thing is that behind this is enforcing validation of the user input over the value list, over the synonyms, and over the fuzzy match, right? If there's the need for disambiguation, again, this will render a menu, show the menu to the user for disambiguation. All of this out of the box, right? So, and it could add other things like the prompts and the error messages. So this is an out-of-the-box approach that gives you this framework that you don't really need to do anything out of this framework. You don't need to create custom states in the dialog flow to handle all of that. And the good thing is that this exactly same approach I mentioned can be used as well for action menus, right? The menu is slightly different in the sense that you don't really want the user to provide. You're only interested in the action, what the user wants to do from those actions. But the principle is exactly the same, and will give you the added advantage of having a case-insensitive menu option. You display the menus. You can have alternating prompts. You can validate the input. You can define synonyms. Again, all the advantages and benefits I just mentioned for the previous situation, all of them applicable. Okay, so to sum this up, if you have so entities within this framework, they have validation, prompting, disambiguation, error messages, custom validation, all of that within this resolve entity state that allows us to really have full control over all of this. And as I mentioned before, especially on the menus part, we see a lot of implementations that go over the way of hard coding the menu selections. And that, so that may work. This is just an example. This may work if the user presses the button and doesn't really try to, just follows the happy path. But everything that is unexpected, this will struggle with addressing that. And yes, you can create more steps and more dialogue logic, but again, that is not making use of one of the best platform features we have, which is the entity resolution. So let me just go back to my browser and show this. So I'm going to bring a different skill. So I will pass the entities demo. So on this particular skill, we have 3 value list entities. So you have here one for the type of pasta, one for the size, and another one with extras, right? All of these are value lists. And you can see they do have resource bundles and expressions for the error messages, disambiguation prompts, different prompts, all of this referenced in the resource bundle, right? So not hard-coded here. And what we have, I'm going to show you just a little bit of the flow. We're not going to dive into this, but just to show what's happening here. So there's 3 states resolve entities. Each one of them handles a particular entity, okay? So if I'm going to try this out, if I say order pasta, so what we see happening here is that the entities are driving the rendering of all the options, right? And you can control how many of these are shown. I didn't change anything. This is default, so it's showing all the options. Okay, so let me do something else. If I say order pasta Alfredo, I'm already providing information up front, right? So in this particular case, because I already said pasta Alfredo, that was slotted, and we went straight to the next resolve entities. And if you come here, if you see the variables, you'll see here that I said Alfredo. This was, I believe, this was a synonym, and the real name, the value was the fettuccine Alfredo. So this has been slotted from the input. So now I've been prompted for the size. Okay, I'm going to say small and medium. So we can choose whether we want entities to accept multiple values. By default, it doesn't. So this one does not expect multiple values. So again, what will happen out of the box here is that, get the message, I found 2 sizes, no, but you can only choose one. So this is the disambiguation prompt. And again, this is also done, there's the validation done, disambiguation prompts, all of this is done out of the box within the entity resolution. Okay, so, okay, now I'm going to choose small, understand only one can be picked. And now we are on the 3rd value list, on the 3rd resolve entity step. So let's say, again, it is telling us to just choose one. I'm going to say garlic and cream. And again, similarly as the previous option, we are getting disambiguation, so you can only choose one. And we are prompted with the options that we tried to choose before. Now, what if I don't want any of these now, and I actually want cheese? The good thing is that this works normally. And you can see here, extras included were cheese. The reason why this is happening is because we're still within the same entity resolution. So it doesn't matter if you're being prompted in this disambiguation for these values, we could still choose the value we wanted from the original value. Let me just show you one thing when it comes to the control you have over this. So if I'm going to the list size, portion size, and I come here and I'm going to say enumeration range 0. So this means that I'm not going to be prompted for the size. So I'm going, actually, no, that's not true. I'm going to be prompted for the size, but I'm not given any options. But in the backend, not in the backend, but in reality, this is going to validate against that list of options. So if I say this, and you see that what I said was picked up in the error message and says, I don't think that's the size we serve. So you can have full control about how you want to present this to the user, whether to show them the list of values or hide the list of values, but still derive the same benefits, right? Within this entity resolution, you do entity slotting, validation, disambiguation, all in the same place. Okay, back to the slides. And again, a little sum up of this chapter. Again, best practices, do use entities whenever you can and use them for the multi-purpose capabilities they have. Validate input, great. Extract, of course, that's the sort of standard behavior. Use it for action menus. Use them to present value lists. Use them to, don't present the value list, but still do the validation in the background. Make use of those synonyms. So these are all, things that can make life easier when you do use entities. And again, the main best practices we're giving away here is step away from the dialog flow, step away from the custom components, of course, whenever possible, and try to really utilize entities as much as you can. Okay, so time for the special ones. And the first special one is what we call the super entity, and that is the composite bag. So if you paid attention, so this is what I just showed in this previous demo, right? We have the free value list entities. Each one of them has its own resolve entities activity. Now, if you already work with composite bags and you look at this and you may say, this is really not a good implementation. So you have a point there, because what we did was to use individual entities and just added them individually. Now, entities are single extraction points, right? So if I'm prompt, let's look here to this middle get pasta size. If I'm prompt for the pasta size, but I say, you know what, I want a cheese pasta. So I respond to something different. That resolve entity will not be able to understand the information I just provided, because that entity is working by itself, right? They're not context aware. They only look for the values they are meant to look. The pasta size entity knows nothing about the pasta type or the extras. So this is the nature of the entities by themselves, and that's perfectly fine. You can still use entities individually if that fits your use case. But in a lot of cases, what we need to do, we need to combine those entities, right? So if we need to do things like out of order extraction, conditional validation, conditional prompting, if we need to have logic that requires us to look to the value of a different entity, in that particular case, they can no longer work individually, right? And that's where this super entity that we call composite bag comes in. And this is a good analogy to explain what is a composite bag. So the composite bag is the resulting object of the sum of all the individual parts, right? When you bring those individually entities together, they will represent something, an object or something like that. And within the business domain, that object can be an order, an account, a meeting. If you've worked in the past with object-oriented programming, you are familiar with this concept. So what we do with the composite bag entity is that we group these entities into logical parts that we can define. And within the composite bag entity, the individual entities, we call them bag items, right? So this is the principle behind it. And there's many benefits to these composite bag entities because they have some particular and specific unique properties that we're going to look in a second. And they also allow to use entity event handlers, which we'll look also after this. So you create these composite bags with individual entities, you can bring custom entities, you can bring system entities, and the absolutely great thing about bringing a system entity into as a bag item is that it will inherit all the properties that are available. I talked before, the system entities don't really have properties you can control. There's no prompts and there's no error messages, and but when you use them as a bag item, you can have all of the properties available for the custom entities as well for the system entities, and this is really powerful. Okay, so again, you add bag items to the composite bag, can be any entity out of the box entity, custom entity. You can add other things like a string, an attachment, location, other stuff you can bring into the group. And special rules like out of order extraction. I'm going to show that in a second. That's a very powerful one. The ability to decide whether or not to prompt the user for a value. So there's a lot of capabilities in this superset entity. But that's not only, okay? So we can design, I'm going back on this slide, so we can design the entities to represent objects like an order or an account, these kind of things. And this has the added benefits of allowing us to, and again, I talked about the model-driven conversation. Man, this is not a technology or not a feature. This is a concept. This is a way that we implement things. So if you look to the right flow from the top down, where you have a welcome, taking off the order, probably show menu first and then take the order and ask for delivery details. This will be a normal interaction. And with the composite bags, we can map that to each single step, right? We can have a composite bag that defines what an order consists of. We can have a composite bag that defines what the delivery context consists of. And we can use this to drive the conversation. So we are moving the logic out of the dialogue flow, which is something we try to do as much as possible, to bring the logic into the entities out of the dialogue flow. And let me show you another example on how can this benefit and make life easier. What we're trying to share with you guys today is how to make life easier, right? Because there's many ways to implement things, but we just want to show how to make life easier. For example, here we have a real example of an interaction, and the chatbot wants to grab the name, the email, and the phone number. Clear example for composite bag. If you define this whole interaction within the composite bag, you will need very little dialogue flow states, right? So you're bringing the complexity of the dialogue flow states, in this case is the YAML implementation, into the composite bag, which will make your life easier. And that's what I want to show in the next demo. So I'm going to bring my browser again. This time a different skill, still within the context of ordering pasta. Let me show you what I meant. I have here two composite bags. We have one for the order. And what you see here below are the individual bag items. So we have 3 bag items for the value list entities that we saw before, and we have one for the system entity. So these bag items, past the size, the extras, the quantity, this define this higher level object, which is the order of pasta. And each one of these have properties you can manage. So let's look to the last one, which is a system entity. And again, a system entity by default, there's no properties you can modify for the system entity, but within a bag item, you have full control. Everything. So error message, you can define multiple values, these ambiguation prompt, these extraction rules, these are specific to the composite bag entity. The ability to say that you want out of order extraction, yes or no, you can control that within the bag item. And this is a really cool thing that we're going to show later. Again, validation rules, prompts, and so on. There's really a lot of things you can do here. Okay, so you have the pasta order, you have the delivery context. Again, these models, the data we need for the delivery, and you have one here more for the menu options. Okay, having said that, let's go to give this a try. So let's say order pasta. So what's happening now is that we are within the first step, and that's the resolve composite bag for the pasta order. So everything that will happen from here onwards happens in the same step. We're not going elsewhere. The dialogue is sort of stopped in that particular resolution step. So if I say order, again, this is similar to the previous demo, but it has some extra cards, a little bit more flashy. Order large bacon pasta, or I could just say large bacon pasta. I'm already providing some information here. So because I provided large, and you can see that has been slotted, the size has been slotted. We have the pasta, we have the size. So we go straight to the third one, which is the extras. As in this particular case, the extras are slightly different, right? We've been prompted here for multiple options. So I could say one, I could say like this, but I can also say, I can also type it. And again, you see we are still in the resolved composite bag. All of the bag items are being handled. And the last one is how many servings you want. Just going to put 2. Now, this whole interaction was within the resolution of this composite bag. Again, we model the conversation within the composite bag. And you bring all of this logic, and you do have more control when you do this with the composite bag. Now, we finalized the order and we get the menu. So this is a menu. It also uses entities, as we talked before. And we have a couple of options: add more pasta, cancel order, place order. So let's just look to this entity, because I actually did not show it before. And this is this entity you can see here, menu.order options. And you can see that not only you have the value, but you have a wide variety of synonyms. So this is widening the ability for you to understand and get the proper action that the user wants. Because when you don't use entities for menus, it's very easy to break. If this is a yes or no, and you say, yeah, go ahead, oh, sure, no problem, this will break, you know? So you do not need to have some robustness for implementing this action menu. So if I use some, let's say, natural language, no, yeah, get me one more, or one more, please. These kind of things, you can define this as synonyms, and this will be understood exactly what kinds of action you want to take, right? So this is the reasoning behind that. Again, we are again on the same ordering of the pasta. So I'm just going to jump straight to the end key. So let me add large Alfredo pasta with olive oil. Okay, so I'm providing all the information up front. And because everything was slotted, we are in the last step, which is how many you want. But at this moment, I decide, you know what, make that small. And I get a different prompt asking for the servings. And this is good, right? So it adds variety. It makes it feel less robotic. Therefore, we always advocate for use multiple prompts. So we are in the same step. We just get prompts slightly different. And if I say, okay, 2, I'm going to just place the order. And on the summary, you're going to see that this large Alfredo pasta was updated to have the size small. Of course, we could give the user in real time, yes, we updated your order. But again, this is a demo. Just want to show that you can have these out of order extraction capabilities, which is, again, this is natural and we need to be able to accommodate that. Now, I have 2 pastas. I'm going to place the order. I'm not going to show the next steps. I don't want to run over time. I still have some things to cover. But what I want to show you is that this is passing the conversation to the composite bag of the delivery of details. So again, you can model your conversations with composite bag, especially when you are handling this kind of higher level objects that you can define with the wide variety of bag items. Okay, so I'm just going to stop the composite bag here because we do have a couple of things to cover, and I want to have time as well for Q&A. Okay, back to slides. And again, best practices to sum this up. Drive the conversations from composite bags, Added benefit, less code, the dialog flows, and you have more control over the conversation, because you do not want to have the messages that, the resource bundles and the messages the bot sends to the user spread across a wide variety of states in the dialog flow. We really want to keep that consistently spread around the entities you have, and not so much in the dialog flow. Okay. Entity event handlers. This is a very powerful capability we have that our team in our internal implementations use it pretty much everywhere, but we know that most of the projects are not yet making use of entity event handlers. And there's no reason not to use them, because most of the implementations out there, there's a lot of very experienced developers with knowledge on our Oracle bots, Node SDK, JavaScript, TypeScript. So the capabilities are there. So we feel this should definitely be more explored. And I'm going to try to explain the benefits of using it. So, and that really is not that hard to include this in your implementations. Now, the entity event handler allows us to address a lot of the challenges we have with Apache free marker limitations, right? It opens a big door to a lot of possibilities, because it does use the bot's Node SDK. You can implement custom code with it within the composite bag resolution. So that's the boundary. So that's the boundary for the entity event handler. It can only be executed within a composite bag resolution. And here on this picture, what you see is a realistic expenses example, where an expense is being submitted, and you need to decide whether a receipt is necessary based on the expense value. Typical, very realistic example, which in reality could be done with a free marker, but this is just to exemplify. And you can do a lot of things with the entity event handler, backend integration, complex decision making. You can render buttons to the user. You can decide on prompts. You can do a lot of things. And okay, so just to park the previous slide, the way it works is like this. For each composite bag, you can register an event handler. An event handler, in the event handler, you can create functions that react to events on the entity level, on bag items. Things like validate, should prompt, publish message. So there's a lot of events that you can use. You can use those events on the particular bag items, on the entity level. You can even have custom ones. And what you're going to do, you register the event you want. You say, for the order pasta, for the quantity bag item, I want to register an event for validate. And when that particular moment arrives, the code that you defined kicks in and is executed. And you can do this in two ways. You can do it on the browser, and I'm going to show it in a little bit. We can also do this on your external, Visual Studio or whatever you use to code the same way that you do for the custom components. And that's the main principle. The entity event handler uses the same Oracle Bots Node SDK, the same thing you use to develop custom components. And again, custom components, that's 2 sessions from now that we're going to explore that. Suffice to say, it's a JavaScript, TypeScript-based SDK that allows you to implement a lot of cool stuff. So having said that, going back to the event types, I mentioned, you can register events on the bag item level, you can register events on the entity level, and you can have custom events. You can render buttons and create events that when the user presses a button, you define what happens. So it's really powerful. And it's a programmatic approach to all those cases where the out-of-the-box capabilities fall short, right? This doesn't mean you don't need or you'll never need to use Apache free marker. This is only for those cases where your requirements are more complex and that it makes sense to use programmatic approach, right? Some of the things you can do with event handlers. You have full control on the bag items. You can reach different composite bags, and that's something an Apache free marker doesn't allow you to do, to reach for a different composite bag. You can backend integration, call REST services. You can render interfaces, you can render buttons, you have full control about all of that. And again, just apply any business logic as complex as it may be. So this really gives you those tools. And we know that a lot of implementations out there, there's a heavy, not burden, but heavy focus on doing things with the custom components. But with the custom component, you need to go out of the composite bag resolution, invoke the custom component, get the output. So it's more complicated. This happens real time during an entity resolution. So let me show you a little example of this. I have an expense reporting skill. These skills were created by my colleague Frank Nifios. Let me show you. So I have a sample report here. We have a couple of composite bags, right? So we have an expense report. We also have an expense item. So a report can have multiple line items, and those two composite bags will drive the entire conversation. You can see here on this bag that you already have an event handler registered here. If I come here to this composite bag, there's nothing for this composite bag, but if you would want to create one, you just, create event. I think this is it. Okay, give me a second. Need to log in again. So I was trying to say that you can create, okay. Interesting. Let me stop sharing for a second. I'm going to bring my Google Chrome browser because I'm not sure what's happening here. So while I try to bring an instance up and running, give me just a second. This is actually the cool stuff I wanted to show, and it seems this is not allowing me to log in. Okay, we are on again. So let me share again my screen. Not sure what happened there. Can you confirm you're seeing my screen, Jürgen?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Okay, so we were on the expense reporting. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this one. And I'll show you the composite bags and the event handlers. And again, you can create the event handler here, straight on the UI. And I'm going to show this one that's already been created, and you can open it. And this is already some code here, right? What happens when you create, you get an empty framework with the handlers, and you can see here, you have handlers for the entity level, for the item level, and so on. So when you generate the event handler, this is an empty framework. And here on top left, you can add events. So you can add events, as I mentioned, entity level, you can add the events for the item level. So if I go here, you see all the bag items. So these are all the bag items that belong to this composite bag. And I can choose employee ID, and then I have the events, right? So these events is what trigger the execution of the code. Okay, now we can add a validate event, an insert event. This inserts in the framework of the code, and within the validate, you can implement your logic. So this is really powerful because it allows you to do a lot of stuff in real time during intent resolution. So let me show you some example on this at work. So let's create an expense report. This will trigger the composite bag for the expense report. The first bag item is a title, okay? I wish this was true, but maybe in the future. Okay, so we give a title, team meeting, Oktoberfest, and then we have another bag item. The second bag item in this case is a regular expression, because regular expressions are made for these things. So in this case, it asks me things like this, right? The employee ID. Now, what will happen in the background is that the entity event handler will pick up this, will look at the country code, and will say, you know what, for this country code, the reimbursement currency is euros. And this is happening in the background, and it's setting that value in a different bag item, right? So that entire logic is happening within the entity event handler without sort of being displayed to the user. Because again, this is an expense report, right? You may be expensing things in British pounds or US dollars, but as an employee, you're going to receive the money back in your own currency. So this is something, and I'm going to show the code for this. This is something that is happening in the entity event handler. Now, another bag item, we need to choose the type of reimbursement. Okay, we need to choose per diem. And here, so normally if you choose per diem, you'll get the options that are valid for a per diem, right? But this is a demo. So we are showing all the options here, including meals, which on a real life scenario, meals will not be expensible under a per diem. Nevertheless, I'm going to show meals, and there was going to be a validation here, right? So this is a more advanced validation. It's a more business logic validation. It's a validation that says, you know what, meals in combination with per diem is not acceptable, right? And this is something that can be tricky to implement, but within the entity event handler, it's really easy. So you can see here, not possible to expense meals if you chose per diem. So let me show you the composite bag. This is within expense item. I'm going to open this. I'm going to scroll down. So you have the different handlers. You have entity, you have custom, and now we have items. And you see here, expense category. This is triggered during validation. And again, I'm not going to cover the entire code, but what this is doing is checking the expense category. It picks up the value from the other composite bag, which was the expense report, checks what was the reimbursement type, makes some, logic applied here, returns true or false. So this is something that will be very hard to implement with Apache FreeMarker. We'll not be able to do this. But with entity event handler, it becomes really easy because you can cross-reference different bag items, different composite bags, and just do something that should not be that hard, right? To apply, to implement this particular business logic. So this is how these things are working. Okay, so that's not allowed. So I'm going to choose something that is allowed. That would be car rental. Being asked for a description. Okay, need to give something here. And I'm being asked for the date. And again, this is an example similar to the challenges we covered at the beginning. If you are creating an expense, and again, even though this is a valid date from the date format point of view, in reality, it should not be accepted because an expense is in the past. And again, this is something that has been implemented in the entity event handler. And I can also just briefly open this one and look for expense date. There you go, expense date. Again, a valid date. And again, well, I'm just going to show this. That's the only thing it does. Checks if the expense date is higher, bigger than the current date. That's all it does. That's the validation it does, which is, again, potentially tricky to do. And it's very easy to implement with an event handler. And again, we are running out of time. I still want time for Q&A, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. So again, I'm going to give a valid date here, and we're going to the next step. And now we've been asked for the currency amount. So here we can implement another logic, which is if you have an expense smaller than $25, I'm not going to ask you for a receipt. If it's higher, you need to provide a receipt. Okay, I see something went wrong here. I think I know what it is. So what we should have seen here is that because I said $400 US, the validate function will say that's bigger than $25. We want a receipt, and the bag item for the receipt will kick in, ask me to upload the receipt, and that will be the end of the flow. But I see that there was an issue with the one of the calculations because, as I said before, we look to the country code and try to identify the currency, the reimbursement currency. So this was done at the beginning. And we also have a REST API that does the real-time currency conversion from US dollars to euros in this case. But I believe that the REST API failed and therefore this sort of didn't really closed up. But the point here is that you can, just to wrap this up, what I want to show here, you can implement a lot of complex or not so complex logic as your requirements demand, right? Things that could potentially be hard to do, you can do all of that in real time during entity resolution. And most of the development teams out there have the knowledge, the capabilities, because you do a lot of custom components, a lot of JavaScript coding, and you can just bring those capabilities into the event handler, and you're really going to create really cool stuff, really powerful, and at the same time, make life easier. Okay, last topic for the day is the machine learning entities. So this is a very, very cool one, very interesting one. So we have here a couple of, again, expense statements, right? And if I would ask you, okay, what kind of entity information you take from here? Obviously, dates and the amounts is very, it jumps to the eye, but you can see also the type of expense. And you also have the merchants, right? So the place where you actually have the expense. Now, the question one will ask is how do we know those are merchants, right? I've never heard about any of this. I never heard about Sandy's Beach House or any of the others, but yet we are capable of looking at this and somehow, understanding that is a merchant, right? So this is a tricky capability to have a conversational AI implement. Luckily for us, we do have machine learning to help us address that. So again, the problem statement is, in some cases, we don't know the information, or we have limited information or limited list of values or patterns. Think about merchant names, book titles, product names, TV series, whatever. It's not really possible for you to know all of the available values out there. So that's a tricky problem. Fortunately, we do have a very specific, it's a unique type of entity called machine learning entities. And that entity, unlike the other types, this uses machine learning to extract information. So the way this works is that in this particular entity, we feed the entity, we train the entity with example utterances, okay? And in those utterances, we make a little annotation and say, this is the value. And we feed the entity with a lot of data to train that model. And what happens is that then at real time, the machine learning entity will extract values. It doesn't know what's extracting. It's just going to extract those values because it learned, or it feels that that particular word in that particular place of the sentence is the entity, right? So this is a bit counterintuitive, seems a bit strange. How can you extract something from a list that you don't know? But it all relies on the data that you feed the entity. And before showing you this at work, I just want to say something. While this entity is really powerful, to allow us to address a lot of tricky challenges one may have, it also requires a certain level of work, effort you need to put into this entity, because there's data to be created, utterances to be generated, model needs to be fed. So there's some balance you need to do, whether it's worth to use this entity or not. But I'll just park that thought for now, and let me just show you this at work. Going to bring a machine learning entity that is able to extract the names of movies or TV shows. So let me show you the entity first of all. So I have machine learning.tv show names. This is the entity. You see here some of those utterances. The way to explore this, on the top right, you have a data set. If you go to the data set, you'll see all the utterances and the annotations in those utterances, right? You see here with the main actor in the show, I Love Lucy, and I Love Lucy is annotated as a show name. And again, a lot of entries here. We have 500 items. The number we recommend is around 1,000 entries. So this goes to show you that, yes, very powerful entity. And yes, it does require some work to gather and manufacture those utterances and annotate them, okay? So you have here these annotations. You can do these annotations here. Of course, I'm not going to do any of that now. I just want to show the annotations. Let me just search for Orville, which is a sci-fi series, no data set, okay? Just want to show you that it's not present on here. In reality, the training, the entity doesn't look for the values you train it with. It looks for the place in the utterance where they appear. And that's really a fundamental difference. So let me just bring, is the Orville family. Okay, found Orville. So again, has no knowledge of the Orville, it extracted as a values. Let me do something else. Who is the lead actor in Game of Bots, a non-existing TV or movie show? Doesn't exist, I just made that up. But still, the entity is able, based on all the training data it had, is able to look at this utterance and be fairly confident that those last 3 words represent the TV show name. And this is very interesting. You can explore this as much as you want. You can put this to test. I actually have a couple of sentences I have here copied. Let me just give me a second, because I was trying this the other day to actually see how robust this was. So I started creating longer and longer sentences. So I created this one here. I was like, I wonder if this will still find, it's a big sentence. I just put a lot of information there. And actually it still is able to extract and find the TV show name here. So you can see this is a very powerful entity. The main thing you need to consider on this entity is define clearly the use case and make a decision whether if it fits your needs, right? Because we've seen people trying to use machine learning entities for use cases where, a value list will do the trick. Yes, a big value list, but potentially a value list would be a better option for this type of entities. And I'm looking at the time. We don't have a lot of time. I just wanted to show you the machine learning entities. I just want to show you one last slide before we open for Q&A. And that is that there's a design process to come up with the machine learning entities. It's important to really define the boundaries of your entity, right? You need to identify those use cases. Like pick up the example of, I want to have an entity, machine learning entity for merchants. Okay, what are the use cases? Do you want to have it to, when you create a merchant, when you create an expense and you reference the merchant, is it for the editing of the expenses? Is it for the deletion? So you need to identify the use cases, and then you need to bring the crowd to create utterances, paraphrasing, creating data, because you need a lot of data to feed to this entity. And within that data, you do need to create those annotations. You need to say, in this utterance, this is the place where the entity is located. So there's a process here. I have more slides to talk, but I'm going to stop now. I just want to say we do have, for both entity event handlers, machine learning entities, we have design camp sessions that are available in our documentation portal, and they really focus on these particular entities and can help you, ramp up that knowledge. So I'm just going to stop for now.
Daniel, thanks for the excellent presentation and amazing demos. So some quick announcements for customers. Oracle Open Build will take place in Las Vegas, October 16th to 20th. We are looking forward to welcome you. Make sure you visit the demo grounds where you can meet the product management team. And as a customer, you can also register for the customer advisory report, which will take place October 17th. Registration is open at bit.ly/OIC Cup 2022. We also start a best practice webcast series where you can learn from successful customers. We will kick off the first session on October 25th in the morning and then continue each quarter. If you look for an implementation partner, choose one of the certified ones, and you can search at partnerfinder.oracle.com, and you can search for pre-built bots and cloud service offerings at Cloud Marketplace. For further information, you can collaborate and post your questions at Cloud Customer Connect, and there you find also an ODA forum. All information is published in our quarterly newsletter, so please subscribe and read the last edition. For partners, we offer hands-on training, which is a one-day workshop. Next one will take place in Portuguese in October, and the English version for EMEA and APAC. All partner news are published in the partner community newsletter. And for today's presentation, make sure you visit our digital assistant website, the documentation with Arti, our chatbot. We will publish today's recording on the Oracle Video Hub. There you can also find the previous editions, including the slides for download. And Cloud Customer Connect is your collaboration portal, and subscribe to the newsletter. With this, we would like to open up for questions and answers. So there are a couple of questions. If you have more questions, please raise your hand and we can unmute yourself, or feel free to post them. So the first one came from Sanjay, and he asked, what is the difference between a composite bag and a list of entities?
But the composite bag, as I mentioned, it represents that sort of higher level object where you bring the bag items into it. While a list of entities, for example, let me give you a quick example. If you want to say, I want to go to LAX or LA or Los Angeles. So in the end, you mean the same thing, but you're representing that with different kinds of information. So you can use a list of entities that will be able to grab different pieces of information regardless of how you provide that information. Okay, so it's a very sort of generic explanation to it. It's not an entity we use that often. Is for very specific use cases. Definitely the one that, it's all over the place. It's composite bag and value list together with the system entities. I would say that combination will amount to probably 80-90% of entity usage.
Excellent. Grant, thanks for answering most of the questions. Are there some you would like to point out for the benefit of everybody?
I think the one that came up was quite interesting was somebody had said they were trying to extract a phone number, a person name, and a company name, and they were using person, entity, phone number, entity, and a string. Now, of course, everything is a string. In any statement, even your numbers and things are a string. So this is where, as Daniel showed at the end, that things like the machine learning entity allow you to define intelligently the thing within the string, which is actually the important part, where you can't normally set a rule. You can't say it's a defined list. You can't say it's this format. Machine learning entities, in fact, while we've been preparing for this session today, I was working on building some machine learning entities for some internal projects we're working on. Really, really powerful, great features, certainly worth using those, and it addresses some of those common problems where people have found the limitations of entities as they currently stand today.
Excellent, thank you. Any other ones you want to point out?
No, I think that's been great. I've really enjoyed the questions that have been asked, and it was good to see those demos. And I hope people have gained a little bit from today's session. Hope we can join you for the next couple of sessions also.
Great, Daniel. There's one question. Today, many bots are built in YAML. When will the GUI design be available?
So, I guess the question is around the dialog flow. So we have a visual flow designer. So I talked a lot about it today without exploring it much, but the next webinar session will be fully dedicated to our visual graphical approach to designing flows. No more YAML.
Wonderful. And that's available today?
Yes.
Excellent. So if you have questions, you can continue to ask them in Cloud Customer Connect. I would like to say thanks for Grant for helping us, Daniel for the excellent presentation. And keep in mind, this is a series of 6 different webcasts. Today was the 3rd one. Part 1 and part 2 are available on demand. And you can go to the registration page and you can watch on the registration page also the on-demand videos. And please register for the upcoming one. The next one will take place October 25th. And like Daniel just mentioned, it will be on conversation design. Part number 5 will be on backend integration. And the last session will focus on the different channels to expose the messages. So please visit the registration page at bit.ly/buildbetterbots. Thank you for attending today. And once you leave, please complete the feedback survey. And we are looking forward to welcome you on October 25th. Thank you for attending.